I begin. But first of all, welcome to our latest Lync and Learn session. My name is Josh Topal, and I'm one of the community program managers for Office 365. So if this is your first time, welcome. And let me tell you, Lync and Learn is a reoccurring program that takes our Office 365 experts and allows them to talk to our community about various Office 365 topics. So we're really pleased today to have Michael Hinckley as our presenter. Michael has over 10 years of experience specializing in solution architecture for organizations that are really from small to large global companies. And Michael is currently a program manager at DSM.net. And today's session will help partners and clients understand how SharePoint Online can benefit their business. So we'll be discussing all things from implementation to defining business needs and goals. So let me just explain a little bit about this session. It'll be an hour long, and we're going to, if you have questions during the session, go ahead and type them into the lower left box here, just the chat window, and we'll be sure to answer them as we're presenting. And if we can't get to your question, we'll hold 5 or 10 minutes at the end to answer anything that we didn't cover. What I'm doing is I am recording this session so that I'm going to throw it up on the blog post. And I'll also take Michael's PowerPoint presentation, put that up there too so you can have it and you can download that. Really excited about this session. Thank you all for joining us. And without further ado, Michael, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Thanks a lot.
All right, great. Thanks.
All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. I'll go ahead and get started. As you can see by the title, it's Why SharePoint Online. Hopefully by the end of it, we'll come to the conclusion why not SharePoint Online is kind of an ulterior goal today. Here's a brief overview of who I am. I'm a program manager at DSM.net. We're located in the Tampa area of Florida. I'll answer the boring details about the resume type stuff, but probably one of the things I'm most proud of is my involvement in the community. I'm the leader of the local SharePoint user group here in Tampa, and I also organize SharePoint Saturdays throughout Florida. We have one coming up in Orlando, and I'll mention this again. I'll go ahead and put this into the chat section here. It's on the June 9th, and the significance to that is everyone's making a trip down to Tech Ed in Orlando. You can come in a day earlier or so for that. I have various certifications that I've worked on in SharePoint, and then I've also recently have a chapter coming out in a book here within the springtime. So that's a little bit about me. Much more would get devastatingly boring. So let's go right into it. One of the questions I get asked and I get asked a lot of questions about SharePoint, is what are the SharePoints out there? I'm not going to go back too far, but just for lack of time, we'll start off with SharePoint 2007. So we have the two versions, the WSS and then the MOS. MOS being your more enterprise the options. Then we move on to SharePoint 2010. So we have a few other options there. We have Foundation, 2010 Server. Those also get split up into standard and enterprise versions. And I want to point this out that to get the standard versions, you need to buy standard CALs. To receive enterprise capacities, you need to buy the standard and the enterprise CAL. So there is no SharePoint Server box license for enterprise. It's a matter of buying CALs. And of course, we move on to SharePoint Online. We have the Plan 1 and Plan 2 that can get rolled into, obviously, if you go into the larger scope of the Office 365 plans. I'm not going to spend a great time on-premises in concept, but I am going to point out that CALs and enterprising is very complex in SharePoint 2010 Server on-premises. This example here just briefly walks through what some of the CAL licensing structures are. One of the things that I find helpful about SharePoint Online is that it diverts the licensing argument that it does over the pricing, but the discussion, and it becomes a little bit simpler. You need to know a lot about it, but not quite as much and down into detail because you're not dealing with physical infrastructure. One of the things that as we move along with SharePoint Online is that, we'll go over this here in a moment, but there are many services available and there are few things that are not available. So one of the first steps I would do whenever even getting into a SharePoint discussion, whether it be if their goal is to go straight online or not, is to make sure that you know where your deltas are. And this is an excellent compare site page that goes onto the online focus of what we have in the foundation, standard, and enterprise offering. The link will be, of course, provided here. And once you know these deltas, you'll know better where to guide your clients or whatever is better for your organization. So on a higher view, let's take a look at Office 365 SharePoint. On premises, we have at the top, and as you can see right off the bat, we go straight towards a lot of features. I mean, this is, you would think that our first iteration would only have one checkmark section, but the delta here, of course, is that the BI and fast search and internet sites. And what I really am excited most about, and I'll touch on this also later, is that if you notice here where it says plan on future service releases, all in all, this is going to get increasingly larger, the surfaces and the features that are offered on the online application. So just a quick run through. Here's basically what's offered on the online part. You have the My Sites. I'm just going to point out the ones that I think are significant, because if when you go back and go do your homework and you check the edition comparison, you're going to see that very quickly SharePoint Online butts its way up very close into that standard version, if not sometimes the enterprise one. So just very quickly, the ones that stand out to me very strongly are SharePoint Workspace. I don't know why there isn't much, there's more about this. This is a very, very powerful tool. You have such things as the document libraries. You can build taxonomies, document ID sets. That's a standard feature on premises. You can do all of these things. Not to mention the people search, which is quite powerful. Then we move on to the services part, the Excel service, Access services, Visio services, and InfoPath services. That right there, you're connecting into the on-premises enterprise edition. So once again, this is a very good deal to go online if you can build this around your business goals and needs. Now, there are a few things that aren't available, and the key word on this slide is yet, there in the title. The first one is BI. That's one of the things that we get called in a lot is about BI and dashboards, etc. And that currently is not available. I imagine it will be coming. How soon? I'm not quite, I'm not at liberty to say, and I don't know either. But that would be a wave that's going to come soon. And once that does, I think that's really going to open up the space even more. So one of the first things, again, is going down, and there'll be many first things in this lecture, by the way, is make sure you get your business goals down as far as what the business and the organization needs. And I'd like to break it down to goals, requirements, and specs. Once you have the needs and the goals set towards those need to go ahead and feature down into the requirements. Notice I said feature down, because as you feature in and write in features to your requirements, those become specifications that you also need to have written down very, very clearly. And I would suggest making those 3 distinct documents. You can combine them into one, and they all need to have individual sign-off on them. I would make sure that they're all devoid of buzzwords and any kind of fuzzy concept that is not there. They can be general, they can be objective, of course, but I would not make them anywhere open to interpretation, so to speak. Another key element is to make sure who's who needs to be there out of the gate as soon as possible. This would include all your business representatives. This would include anybody in IT that you need, and this would include anybody who has any kind of sign-off privileges. Again, get it all signed off by a senior representative or senior sponsor, and most of the time that senior sponsor is not necessarily an executive, and cannot also be someone who actually signs the checks, but it's someone who can actually pick up the phone and get things done, or make that person sign that check, so to speak. So what are some of the common business goals? Well, I'll let you read through some of these, and I won't go over them line by line, but nonetheless, they're very generic and they're very open, and what I've found is basically all organizations suffer the same kind of objective pain points. The needs for efficiency, the needs for improvement. There's a great cry for connecting people and users at all levels, whether it be the power user to the simple end user. Everybody wants to increase their collaboration activities, productivity. People want to consolidate ownership of information. They want to manage information. They want to make sure that information goes from old to new, to archive, to whatever it needs to be. Another thing, of course, is that you'll see some of the responsiveness is that they want to unlock areas that have been currently locked down. Now, that could mean that it's on someone's laptop, a shared folder, many versions down and more, so to speak. And another aspect, of course, that comes up is working seamlessly with partners, whether they be internal or external. One good thing that SharePoint does, and Microsoft along with it, is they kind of use a lot of wording and features towards that wording. And one that I like very much is the workloads. So as you're building your plan, you're building your goal, you're building your features and your specs, if you chunk them out into workloads, you're going to find it a little bit easier to manipulate and to take on, because if you just do it SharePoint as a whole, SharePoint's a large platform that can do so many things, it helps to kind of compartmentalize them for yourself. So whether it be the social computing aspects, whether you want to have a portal for the entire organization or subgroups within the organization, if it is, content management and search, if you take those out, they'll be part of the big picture, but again, breaking them down helps, dividing the groups up, who needs to be responsible, whose responsibilities will need to be taken into consideration. So what makes this SharePoint so special? Well, I like to think of it as the shared environment that helps out so much. It helps participation, it helps with collaboration. Now, those are key terms, so what exactly do I mean? By dialing in things, you'll have the ability to load files, content, documents that will be moved up onto a single pane of glass, if you will. Now, this single pane of glass can be taken care of and worked on by what can essentially become your internal network. That's with the social features and profiles, of course. So if you can see down to some of the screenshots, you have examples of icons of documents. You have notifications of when they were modified, checked out whatsoever. You also see who they were modified and checked out by. The green indicating that person, if they're on Lync, you'll see what their availability is. So it's kind of freeing people from email is a feature that we ask, that gets asked of us a lot. Losing things in email. Well, this is one way to collaborate. Go straight into it. Another feature there is the ratings that I find very well. So if let's say we put a sales proposal together, it's a sales proposal dedicated for the European market. Someone else in the organization needs European sales information. They'll be able to go through, search, find a document. They'll be able to put a face to the document, whether it be a creator or one of the collaborators. And if the ratings have been turned on, they'll see the relevancy of it. The ratings could be anywhere. It could be, you could set that in your government how you would like. Whether the content was A grade or, for example, sometimes I've grown into things when I've worked in larger organizations where it's actually good content, but it's all screenshots because it was a marketing presentation, and it was a marketing presentation to the marketing team where they were going over concepts. So because of SharePoint and because of these features were lit up, I was able to find out that it was actually Dave Smith who actually was the creator of it. I found Dave. He was not directly in my line of business, but we were able to talk, collaborate, and he was able to pass me on some of the letters and numbers from the Word documents that didn't want him to help those PowerPoints. So that feature right there is amazing. Nonetheless, the metadata that can be associated and help you in tagging with that as well. So again, I've kind of talked into myself, but the other thing I want to mention here is that apart from the metadata, is that you have content types. So another thing that can be very, very helpful is that if you have a form or if you have a template form of a document, it can be posted one time and used once again, as opposed to everyone in the organization getting one file. Very powerful tool. I suggest you read into that as you go into your SharePoint implementations. Another one that's been quite helpful is document sets, and I'll tell a brief story about this. I was working with a global financial company, and we put together workflows, which they were absolutely adored. It got up high enough to a very high-level director up on Wall Street who was quite happy with the performance of this, until one day he called me and he said, well, I'm getting all these requests for workflows and approvals, and I thought, here comes another great compliment I'm about to get. And he said, there are too many of them. I don't know which document is which, because in this proposal or this contract that we're working on, there are 3 Word documents that will eventually become a final one. There's a PowerPoint presentation, and there are 4 spreadsheets. So I, in essence, have 8 or 9 different workflows that I need to approve. I need one set for the whole project, and this is something that document sets can help do. Some of the composite services that I find very helpful are the following: the Access services, the Visio, and of course the workflows that I mentioned. I mentioned Access because, again, I was working in the financial sector, and then what I found is that getting to IT and getting a project built was very long and arduous, whether it was budgeting, whether it was resources, or whether it was just plain internal politics. So what the business did is they went straight to Access and used that. They were running an incredible amount of intricate and critical business data via Access, the client application. Well, the actual Access database files were hidden out on shared drives. Those occasionally goes down, they occasionally lose connection, and the original author happened to be a remote worker who had it on his laptop, the original file. And when that went down, there was a great deal of recovery plans that had to go into place. And when I mean go into place, I mean they had to be created on the spot. So you'll find that a lot of people that I see sometimes they kind of cringe when they see Access, but I see it as a powerful tool for the end user. Finding the right person. I can't begin to go on how important this is if you can configure this correctly. This can be configured directly through Active Directory and brought in. So not only can you put a face and a name to a person, you can see what past projects they've worked out, what some of the recently authored content that they've gone through, what some of their expertise is that you have people fill in. One of the things I really dislike and want to sway people away towards is that this is not Facebook for the organization. There are some areas that are helpful. For example, when you find a search and find somebody that went to the university you went to, there could be a common bond reaching out to somebody. That's quite helpful. But I see this more as, again, it's an expertise in a person to look up. So what are some of the main architectural decisions? I've kind of gone through a little bit of the overview, what I would say was some of the home run hitters right after that. One would be the capabilities. Again, you need to go back to the feature and addition matrix that I had for you earlier, and you need to compare those because you're going to need to know that right off the bat. Many times you're going to find that people want to know, they're going to desire enterprise-type features that might not be available on your unenterprise budget and or on the SharePoint Online just yet. So it's important you know those capabilities are not on your roadmap right away. Again, divide them up. Once you have those, divide those up into workloads. That was going to help your architecture, going to streamline it. Authentication is also a big thing. In organizations, there are many times that's actually the #1 reduction in latency for SharePoint I read recently in a report is that the authentication hadn't worked. So once you have a plan for that down, you'll see that sometimes that might help getting through the documents a lot quicker. Permissions, and I mean this more on the level of your information architecture, which I'll speak down on in a moment, but what people need to have eyes on what and where. Very important. Decision makers always like to see that, especially when it comes down to very confidential data. And it also goes into the fact of what needs to be published right now. Data might not be altogether confidential, such as the HR plan, for example, but if someone's working on the HR plan for next year and it needs to not yet published, then that permission level can be changed on the fly there. Make sure you have a creation of cohesive user experience in your plans as well, because many times people are not going to want SharePoint to look like SharePoint, but they're going to want it to be part of the actual organizational, content, look, feel, and branding altogether. Information architecture deals with your site taxonomy, how they're going to be built down, how people are actually going to drag and click and get everywhere. Very important because even like working with the share folder, you don't want people clicking and driving down too far. You want to build in some easy navigation and also easy logical navigation that will know where they'll go. Make sure you have a plan for onboarding your data and offboarding at the same time, whether that could be something simple as versioning or actually moving things that will need to be locked down if it's something that's more of a record type or it's something that just needs to be taken off in a timely fashion. As mobile devices are coming more and more apparent, make sure you have that built into your architecture. There will be some tweaks, especially as the tablets come more and more prevalent. Make sure you have that in your governance plan. And then also, especially if you're going to go anywhere towards hybrid, make sure you speak to your hardware guys and they have all that taken care of. So what's it going to take? To get this going in your organization, you're going to basically need ROI capabilities versus the cost. My suggestion with that is that not only do you build metrics around those, but also make sure that you plan to build a story around them. SharePoint will often have maybe a longer level to come back with numbers on it, depending how you define for ROI. But if you build a story around it, people will be able to tell how it was more helpful, how it was able to make them more efficient. Again, make sure you know your cutoff points. When you go into online, make sure you're very, very comfortable with talking about the user plans. One of the great things about that is that you can make sure that some people have a higher level of a user plan for functionality, and some have a lower plan for consuming information. Noting your trade-offs, and then all of a sudden understanding the platform as a whole. And that's going to be a little bit tricky because as online moves more and more with its features in line with the on-premises version, you're going to find yourself, as you're doing your research, finding SharePoint articles and perhaps to-dos and blogs and things like that, and you're going to make sure to know which can be applied where. I can't stress enough knowing your business goals and have those down for now, but also down the road, just over the bend, and then also what your final, picture needs to look like. Make sure you map those, again, to the workloads, and then also, do not underestimate this. It's a major effort to get end users to use it sometimes. And this could be just from change management to training. So make sure that you make those plans accordingly. While we're on that subject here, a good friend of mine, Lee Reed, wrote an excellent series of blog posts on nothingbutSharePoint.com. And these are the 8 things that he wrote down as suggestions for SharePoint user adoption. There's a lot of excitement about SharePoint in organizations. Sometimes the organizations are not able to get out enough SharePoint functionality as quickly as people actually want them or have learned to use them. So make sure you follow these 8 simple tasks here. I mentioned briefly about governance, so let me go into a little bit deeper about the who's of governance. I have this slide here that goes over the roles. So if you see, we have 17 roles here. This is for on-premises. That's quite a lot of people. And many times, I'll put the caveat here, you're going to see that this, obviously these people can be one person, some of them will be combined, but as you go into online, it kind of changes a little bit. So you've knocked out at least 5. The Active Directory is also the Jolly there that plays, because that could, depending on your architecture and how your solution goes through, that person might need to be in there. But just know that just because these roles have diminished doesn't mean that governance is that less important. It just means you can spend more and more time on the architecture solution, the business solution, as opposed to hardware configuration and those types of things. Again, I mentioned the authentication, so the key one is that when you go through, you have your Microsoft Online ID, the one that's prescribed to you in the beginning. You can also configure it with your AD credentials with ADFS. And then also the features that I'm using more and more with clients is that I'm seeing that they want to associate the live IDs with external users. So that is very, very helpful. And now I saw an article recently that you can actually associate those. So we won't have to have Mike at Microsoft.com can actually have that associated with a live ID and log in with his email that he's used. Service level agreements. Well, these are some of the kickers sometimes, and people want to point this out to us. So let's take a brief look at this. The 3 lines is what is the agreement here with SharePoint Online. And one thing when communicating to the business is you're going to want to make sure that you know and they know that what that time actually means. If you tell someone that 99.9% of the time it's going to be up and relevant, then some people are going to say, well, that's fine, but that you actually have to break it down into the numbers. I've found in my research is that as you're going down into the 4, 5, and 6 nines, people sometimes want to go for that. They want that absolute certainty that we're only going to be down 32 seconds during the year. Well, I can tell you that the cost just to go from 1 9 to the next 9 is quite substantial. So make sure to have that down and make sure to have that rebuttal ready when someone wants to go to that point, because again, it is about, again, the investment and the return on investment. Some of the legal matters that kind of get brought up about SharePoint Online, well, it's in the cloud. I always say Office 365 is HIPAA compliant. If you're not a HIPAA compliant organization, then I think you're going to be fine. Many people strive to get HIPAA compliant, and I've been on projects that they've worked tremendously hard on that. So just out of the box, having it be HIPAA compliant should take care of about anything that you should need here in the United States. Now, as you move globally, you could have some legal restrictions. I know that Germany does have some restrictions, and also some other countries about the data where it's hosted. So make sure that once you're looking globally, that you have that under consideration. Another nice thing is that the data centers are, of course, located throughout the continent and throughout the world, and they're grouped by continent, excuse me. This is a recent tweet that I saw here coming from Office 365 Saturday. So you can imagine that the infrastructure is there to support you. That does not keep me up at night from a client and a consultant basis. Another thing you're going to have to keep cognizant of is, of course, the storage overview. This is the data here. This is the equations and such. When I told you to go ahead and make sure that you know your license plans, if you're going to be the Office 365 or SharePoint Online, the go-to person, make sure you have these, well ingrained into your head, because one of the things that I found is it's kind of like your cell phone provider. You might go over and you're going to increase these costs. So make sure that you plan that, and that goes on with your information architecture and, of course, your taxonomy overview. So if you can plan for the site, you know exactly what kind of content you're going to be looking for and the content growth you're going to be looking for. Just as a heads up, a sneaky thing about SharePoint is that once you do turn on versioning, you keep an actual full copy of that version. So if you have 5 versions at 10 megabytes each, you're going to be looking at 50 megabytes with the versioning. So there is a bit of a trade-off that you need to plan for. Another one, of course, is the recycle bin. As you keep your recycle bin open for a long enough time for people to recover data, that's going to actually keep up data sizes as well. So again, make sure this is in your plans. People always ask me a little bit about scenarios, just apart from going straight online. Well, the one that comes just quickly, I drew this up, is that you can have some on-premises and online. One quick one would be if you've already made the investment, say, into Fast Search, a feature that's not available in the online. You might have made that purchase. You may have some business intelligence sitting on 2010 on-premises. And then you may have had some legacy custom applications that just didn't make sense to make the investment in 2010 premises. So how could you perhaps reduce some costs, or perhaps reach people out to the other side of the globe without having to migrate and relocate farms? In this instance, SharePoint Online would be a perfect one. You could tie it up to the on-premises AD, yet keep all the features that you invested in on-premises until they sunset. So let's go back to on-premises again. What do you need to buy with on-premises? I didn't dare put some of the prices up here because it can get expensive, especially if you get into the enterprise levels. Again, it's all about the return on investment. So what you'll need to buy, irregardless, is going to be you need to be Windows servers and licenses for that, where will be the CALs and the outgoing licenses. You do have Foundation, which is sitting on there, that you can light up for free. Once you get into the SharePoint server, you're going to need that, boxes for that, of course, depending on the architecture. You're going to need your standard CALs. You're going to need your standard CALs plus your enterprise CALs for the enterprise features. As you grow, of course, it is SQL related, so you're going to make sure you need to have all your SQL licensing in place. That could either mean standard or enterprises, CALs, or per processor licensing. And then, of course, if you want to get into the Fast Search, again, more hardware and more licensing to go there. Another key thing I like to mention to people is that make sure that you have your planning and proof of concepts down. And those can be contained within the SharePoint deployment planning services. I have a link later on in the presentation that goes along with your those go with your software assurances. So here it is. I basically deal with mid-sized to enterprise clients. I go right to the enterprise features because I think that is the best bang for the buck there. I prescribe usually the E3 version. It's the most comprehensive that it has. Again, the nice thing that I find is what you can do is you can have a certain set of your community working on the E3. Perhaps if they're only content consumers, you can move them down into the E2 or perhaps only the E1, depending on the necessity of the organization. This is a very powerful, because one of the complaints I do get sometimes from clients when we have those all painful licensing discussions is that, well, if you're on premises, why do I have to buy CALs for everybody, yet everyone's not using the features? With this, you can kind of dissect, which would be a savings right away. Here's some of the offerings on the standalones. As you can see, SharePoint Online has 2 different ones, and the cutoff here, of course, the delta is the forms and the Access, Excel, and Visio services that needs to be done. So what would be the point if you wanted to go ahead and, pardon me, I want to point this out is that if you want, on this slide, if you went ahead and just wanted to go ahead and do everything a la carte, so to speak, and you wanted to go, say, Exchange Online Plan 2, you wanted to go with the Lync Plan 2, and you wanted to go with the Office Pro, you're looking at around about $28, $29 a month per person if you did that, and you're keeping SharePoint out of the game. Yet if you were to go back to the E3 that includes all those, you're only at $24 a month, and you've gained SharePoint. So again, when you're going to the a la carte version, make sure you do your calculations very, very carefully and go back to your planning and your features, because you might find out that it might be worth it to open up a discussion to save the money and, you know, take on Exchange if you weren't looking at it. Or what I found very successful is that we've always used a different web conferencing, and we've used Lync, and the savings just on Lync alone has paid for our SharePoint Online and Office Online. So the other big question, I always come up with it depends, and it usually depends on IT sometimes, because again, it's the infrastructure, it's the buying, it's the purposes that I've pulled up. This is provided to me by Microsoft as kind of an overview of the platform development. As you can see, that's a lot of time to ask out of any organization to get SharePoint up and running for non-premises. There are, of course, ways to make this quicker and ways to kind of streamline things at the sacrifice of some, you know, quality and some goals to your efficiencies. But again, this is what the overview is. With online, this is the Office 365 for the entire package. So we went from all those hours down to just 12 weeks. And as you can see, it almost takes just about as much time for the planning and discovery of things as it does actually to get things implemented and up. So the key thing I want to mention about these two slides is just because Office Online is that much quicker to get up and get going, don't think that SharePoint Online is going to be, you know, you're not going to be using it within the first 10 minutes. Make sure you do your planning, make sure you do your governance, make sure the business goals need to be driven and they need to be mapped to the feature sets. If not, then it's just going to be what other SharePoint implementations unfortunately get to be, is that they've been rushed into and they haven't been drawn out correctly. One of the key things I always like to mention is that there's a lot of valuable content out there, and one such is the SharePoint Deployment Guide. Actually, when you get the presentation, there's a link to this. This is updated on a regular basis, and we'll go through it and give you all the information you'll need to actually deploy and get the Office 365, especially the SharePoint, within your organization going. Same goes for the Planning Guide. It's more of an overview. And then there's also the online planning and administration site that helps provide any information that you'll need. Some other tools I found to be helpful is make sure you go to TechNet quite often. There's a lot of articles that are published, apart from the community that we have here based on this community site. There's a lot of people out there who are spending a lot of time creating content to help you move and make sure that SharePoint is actually valid in your organization. One of the momentary things that you're going to find is that you're going to want to bing something or do a web search. I would actually hold off on that and make sure you go to TechNet first. Make sure you scan these Microsoft articles, because many times you'll have important infrastructure things that are on there, such as what are the service options, what are the boundaries, what are the limitations. I find those to be very, very helpful, and then afterwards you might go to a blog offering that helps you kind of work your way around the situation that you haven't been able to find. Another important thing is to make sure you check your updates. Dial them every 2 to 4 weeks. For the enterprises, these are linked, and there's also for professionals and small businesses. These are quite helpful, and they'll also be available to you on a regular basis to double check. And as I can tell you, with SharePoint Online and Office 365, those come very fast and furious. Some more community resources that I found to be helpful, or that there's the one thing, there's my video, of course, that's dealing with SharePoint 2010. Acceler runs that. There's a lot of helpful hints, and it's mainly about SharePoint 2010, but again, you're going to find an overlap in features. So these are basically a lot of people involved in the SharePoint community, people who speak at events, and they're going to give you their opinion on how things are moving around and working within SharePoint. Another great thing that I'm involved with is SharePoint Saturday. They're all over the world, in fact. It's a free day with speakers and MVPs coming in to speak about SharePoint, conference quality material at the local level. And I'm finding more and more as I organize is that the requests certainly for Office 365 and SharePoint Online sessions are going to be increasing such that I'm sure that you'll see a full track there at those. And then recently launched and quite successful, I hear, was the Office 365 Saturday, and they recently had one in Redmond. I'm sure that we're going to see those popping up, and they'll be as popular as the SharePoint Saturdays are. Another great resource is there's a free ebook on how to connect and collaborate everywhere. This is something that would be great to download, something great to look over. A first instance to get to a site I always put up is a how to use SharePoint site. So this would be a great thing for people to put up, share within the organization. It's a free training material. It could be the impotence of starting a training discussion or starting a user discussion to get users on board. So what do deciders want to see? The decision deciders is what I call them. Overall, you're going to need to look at your size of your organization. You're going to want to make sure to know how that size applies to them geographically, where they sit in the world or where they sit in other parts of your particular country. What kind of compliance issues you're going to have to deal with that are already sitting within your businesses, that are already quite important and drive a lot of your decisions, so to speak. What kind of data security levels are you going to have? Are there going to be certain areas that you want to lock down firmer than others? And you want to make sure that you communicate those quite clearly. Is there any kind of business critical custom applications that you might have? The example I had earlier is that there were one sitting on an older version of 2007 SharePoint. Some of those might not be able to be transformed over yet, or at all, depending on how they were designed and developed. So you want to make sure that you take that into consideration to make sure that access is still available to that. Your size and your cost of content. Again, I can't stress that enough. That's going to be something that surprises people, because when it does get to a point where size becomes a problem, there's too much content, that can of course hit the pocketbook, so to speak, but it can also hit latency and cause confusion if it's not organized correctly. Make sure you know that the new features that are coming down on the line, so always keep on track. So, will there be a BI offering and an eventual E5 for enterprise level? I'm pretty sure there will be. So just make sure that you have roadmaps designed for those to come down, and of course keep tuned into the community where those will be announced, quite steadily. And another one I like to add on is that, our Lync and Outlook True Value Add. When I went back to the example there where we went to the a la carte mode, I'm finding that Lync, more and more people are finding that that's actually the value add that they didn't think that was actually existed in the equation. They're stepping away from the WebExes, they're stepping away from some of the other providers that they've used because they found that they already have it packaged and ready to go, and quite available on their mobile devices. So your next steps. My prediction, I'll go ahead and put my hand out and see if it gets chopped off, is that all features will be available in the cloud. It's only going to be a question of when. I had a very interesting lunch with a client. He was a C-level gentleman, and he was in charge of the global purchasing department. He was formerly in IT and had been, done some housekeeping there and moved into this department. And I asked him about this. I said, are you very worried about the cloud and how sensitive it is, and your financial data and et cetera, et cetera? And he looked at me and he said, no, that will all be sorted out, and it'll all be a question of comfortability. And his actual prediction is that once cloud gets kind of dialed down as a buzz term, then that's when you're going to see the gears shift on those. So this was a non-IT person coming in telling me this, who had worked enough in IT to know that this is the trend that we saw. So I found that to be very, very revealing. I also see the SharePoint Solution Architect, a position you don't see too much out there, but I think that you're going to see that much, much more. I think that space is going to open up wide up, this almost super-powered user, because especially with SharePoint Online, you're taking away the person that kind of needs to pet the hardware and make sure the lights are on and doing the backups and the features, etc. They're going directly and dialing into the business and putting solutions out there as quickly as they possibly can. And that person is going to become more and more demand, a person that knows the business, a person that understands SharePoint, and a person that thoroughly knows what the capabilities are going to be for this. I would say that if you're taking your first steps, make sure that you have a real working proof of concept going before you go into anything larger scale. That could be anything small, from a quick collaboration environment to a project management tracking system. These things are very, very helpful. Make sure that you get the right people. Make sure you get impassioned people on it, because those will be the people who are going to drive and take things over to the next level and communicate those out to all the groups within the organization. And then again, with your software assurances, if you have the certain amount of days that you've earned up to that, you can actually have 1 to 3 to 5 to 10 or 15 days planning services with a consultant group that can come in and go through and help you walk through these steps. I find that it's not so much that the organizations can't handle it, it's just that they have so much on their plate that the research alone in the SharePoint goes into days and years, and it's quite helpful to bring somebody to help in plan these things and point you in the right direction. I put up some couple of infographics just real quick for your benefit and also for your use. Is that if you need some help convincing things around Office 365, I found this to be very useful just to show the one on the left to show who and what groups are working on this and using this. So it's not just a buzz term that's kind of cool to go around. It's something that's actually got relevancy. And then the other side too is that if you find yourself in a competitive situation with Google and the Google apps, this one clearly defines where Google lacks, and of course Microsoft excels. So, what are some of the other questions I get about Office 365? So, large organizations, they always want to ask, is it the cloud? Is it something for us, guys? My answer is yes. It all depends, again, on what your business goals and what you're planning to use for it. But I definitely see it as a definite solution for the enterprise. One of the things I find in that enterprise section is that I find departments and smaller teams are absolutely clamoring for it. As I mentioned beforehand, sometimes IT can be a roadblock, not necessarily on purpose, but there are agendas and there are workflows, and these teams are going to do anything they can to get their solutions and to get their opportunities as quick as possible. The unpleasant caveat to that is that sometimes they need to work around. So in one instance, we found that people were actually using LinkedIn groups to collaborate and posting confidential data because they couldn't get a collaboration environment up and available as quick as they could. Obviously, Office 365 would have been able to work that out very quickly, so that became a major hot issue. So, small businesses, I've found that the small organizations, basically, they haven't been exposed to SharePoint, so there needs to be a bit of education that goes on there of what SharePoint is, what they can do with it, and then very quite frankly, after those discussions happen, the next question is, where can I go to sign up? So if you are new to SharePoint, just be ready. There is a learning curve. It's similar to that learning curve as on-premises, and what I mean that is that the functionality and getting through with that. Obviously, the hardware and the architecture are a different subject altogether, but just the actual configuring and planning for SharePoint is very similar. Again, I'm not ad nauseum here. Make sure those business goals drive that architecture. Do not skip governance whatsoever. Even if you have a small governance with a plan to grow, just get it down, get it going, get the conversations there, and make sure you set those time frames to do it. Governance is going to drive everything. Governance is going to be your who uses it, who doesn't use it, who sees what they see, when they see it, and then how often they're going to be using it, how it's going to grow, and then what kind of staffing requirements are we going to need for it. Again, back to the slide earlier where I talked about the roles in the governance. Just because you don't have a SQL admin having to be front and center on this doesn't mean that a person, one full-time employment, is not to be replaced by another, because you might need another solution architecture person to help go through this. Someone to deal with permissions, someone to deal with new site requests, etc. All those things need to be discussed. And then you also want to make sure that Again, ad nauseum, make sure you know the difference of what's available in Office 365 as opposed to on-premises. That's a key one, because what you're going to find is that people in the business are going to get excited about this. They're going to do research about SharePoint. There will be a gray area where they might go between what's on-prem and what's in Office 365, and just make sure that you can answer those questions very quickly. And then a great start off is OneNote online. People really do find that as a great instance to get going for collaboration. Again, some of the great first forays you want to go into is project management. If you want to reach people from around the globe, I'm finding more and more mobiles coming up in Office 365 discussions, especially with the Office web apps. very, very powerful. And then any type of extranet that you want to try and get that. Don't underestimate any kind of cloud or SharePoint prejudice. I've seen it basically as it can be, people perceive it as job threat, whether it be cloud or SharePoint. It's fear of the unknown, it's fear of change, and then fear of expectations. Again, that's the gray area that goes around. I find that people don't know the difference between the on-prem and the online versions. Just a real quick overview. I saw this recently being posted. It was the total economic impact of 365, so you can just look at the savings there. The link is on the study here. Make sure you go through the study with a fine-tooth comb and pull out what you need to pull out. If you do need to go ahead and make proposals and tailor them to your organization, because there is the actual key and the equations that you'll need to go through and work this up within your organization. I have a couple quotes here from a couple guys that I know, and this is just about SharePoint altogether, and I do find it relevant for SharePoint Online. So just quickly, the businesses and the super users and the actual lines of business are going to want to use and are begging for the need for collaboration and anything else they can use with SharePoint. So the quicker you can get it to them in a working and well-defined governance and information architecture package, you're going to find those efficiencies and those gains that we saw there on that previous slide. That concludes the speech there that I have for today. There'll be a link again for the 30-day trial. I'll go ahead and I didn't get a chance to look over Josh. I kind of zoned out in there. So if you have any relevant questions you saw people typing in there, you can go ahead and fire those to me if you saw those.
Sure, they're coming in right now. First of all, great job. Thanks for the presentation. But we have one from Dan. Do you get asked about SharePoint versus other wiki type of services? How do they differ and what's better, etc.?
I have to be honest, not so much. I've done a little bit on my personal, not so much because I deal with a lot of people who are basically Microsoft shops and enterprise licensing, etc. I have seen a little bit about some competitors like Dropbox and things of those natures. I find that those are kind of helpful depending on if you're relating towards device-related things. I know I'm kind of going off kilter on the topic, but there's so much more in SharePoint that you can use. SharePoint can be much more than just collaboration. You have your embedded social with the expertise search, etc. So I find SharePoint winning. I'm sorry I can't come with a more eloquent answer than that, but I see it just be more feature-rich, to tell the truth.
Okay. We have a couple people typing. Here's one from Robin. Does small business need to purchase any hardware to implement SharePoint Online?
Trick question. So it would be yes. You have to, as long as you need to buy something, you can get you online and you can type on it. So that would be it. Laptop, PC, tablet.
All right. So is it possible to implement SSO without AD?
I have to admit, I don't know. I seem to remember reading something about that. I'm, very, very SharePoint. I usually hand off that type of thing to the admin type of people. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that one. I can look it up and get back to you.
Okay, I have a few more questions. And then those asking about the slides, we will have that available on the blog after this session. And the blog post is there in the chat window. So here's one from Ward. Any chance P1 plan will be HTTPS sometime soon? So this, I'll talk about this. We haven't announced anything yet, but so just stay tuned on the blog and the community for all those type of service updates. And then Frank, other authentication possibilities for external users than Windows Live ID. So you're asking, are there other possibilities for external users to authenticate other than Windows Live ID? Do you have any idea about this, Michael?
No, I don't believe there are. I believe you can associate an email to a Live ID now, but I think Live ID is the key.
All right, we have a few more questions coming in. So any stories about migrating existing file shares to SharePoint doc libraries in Office 365?
Yes, I've seen some successful ones that have worked very well. I'm not going to go ahead and do any publicizing for any companies, but the ones that I did that worked well used a third-party tool. And that helped not only with the facilitating of just the actual moving, but the organization of it. And it was treated as a proper project. It just wasn't a copy and paste. So that goes into making sure the metadata was in place. Anything that needed new metadata, the site architecture and the hierarchies were all taken care of.
Okay, great. So we have time for one or two more quick questions. All right, well, here's one. When connections to external sources, for example, on-premise SQL from Sandbox solutions will be available. So when will connections to external sources from Sandbox solutions be available?
I don't know that, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's more of a product team question. So again, this goes with the same thing with answering about HTTPS. There's really, the best way to know is when we know and we can divulge type of information for service updates. That'll all be on the Office 365 community. So check the service update wiki. I'll grab the link real quick and paste it in the text box. So any last questions for Michael? All right. Here's Robin typing. One more, and then no, that's it. All right, great. So thank you so much for the presentation, Michael. Thanks for joining. Be sure to look at the blog for the deck and the video. But yeah, thanks again.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.